This week on Quality Digest Live, we consider how ISO 14001 and ISO 50,001, yeah, not 90,001, 50,001, how both of those can benefit the environment and the bottom line.
That's right. Plus some Christmas time perspective on loss and recovery through the power of sharing stories and doing good work. That and more when we come back. Welcome back to the Winter Solstice edition of Quality Digest Live for, guess what, December 21st, 2018.
4 days till Christmas.
There you go. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Interesting story yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but there was an incident with a Tesla vehicle down in San Jose. I believe it was yesterday, day before yesterday. It was guy had a flat tire. It was being towed to the shop. Got to the shop, and the battery caught on fire.
Wow.
The old battery catch on fire. We see a lot of those.
Yeah,
and of course, it took a long time to put it out because big batteries like that are hard to put out. Matter of fact, they're trying to train fire people how to deal with electric car battery fires because you don't put them out the same way. And then of course, they put it out and a few hours later it burst back into flames again. So there was this whole story and it was in the news all day long. And it seems like anytime anything comes up with Teslas or autonomous vehicles, whether there's an accident, well, Tesla's had some accidents, we're in autonomous mode, semi-autonomous mode, or there's something unusual like a battery fire or something that makes the news and it's all the buzz and everybody's talking about it, these newfangled vehicles and how untrustworthy they are.
Right.
But unless you read deeper, not many stories talk about what it is statistically. It's like, let's say in the case of a car battery fire, electric car battery fire, one statistic I ran across was like, there is a electric vehicle car battery fire about once every 100 million miles.
Okay.
There is a gas vehicle car fire, due to the gasoline gas tank fire, about once every 20 million miles. So about five times more, right? Okay. But you don't hear that. But we vehicle fires all the time. And unless it's blocking traffic, you don't hear about it. Nobody says anything about it, right?
And it's also easy to put out.
And that is true. It is easy to put out. But so you have something like an autonomous vehicle, and again, and it's been a while since I looked up the numbers, but the number of fatalities per mile for autonomous vehicles versus the number of fatalities per regular vehicles. Again, there's really no comparison.
Yeah,
yet,
autonomous
right?
are much safer.
They're still much safer, but we don't talk about that. So I find that very interesting for a number of reasons, but I don't want to say my reasons just yet. When you hear about stuff like that and what I just said, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a psychology. It's people are the thing that is new is scary and it's unanticipated. They don't know what to make of it. So any accident, any fatality that's tied to it is automatically going to make the thing seem really nefarious and dangerous and scary when actually it may be much safer. I think about it from the perspective of like. Elon Musk and Richard Branson are both trying to do this these below surface super maglev transportation systems, these loops. And it's like, you think about it, that could potentially be really safe and really effective. There's going to be fatalities. There's going to be consumer fatalities with that as that stuff gets rolled out. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Yeah.
That's going to be a big story when that stuff happens because
maglevs unsafe.
Maglevs are unsafe because it's weird. Get into a pod and go under the ground at 700 miles an hour. It's like, oh my God, as opposed to going 30,000 feet in the air. It's the unknown is my thought about it. It's focused on because it's different, it's weird, it's kind of scary, and people just haven't gotten used to it yet.
Well, I also think that it's also kind of tough when you're an innovator and you have a product and you know that statistically anyway, it's safer or at least as safe as anything that's on the market, regardless of whether we're talking, whether it's a drug or a medical device or an autonomous vehicle or an electric vehicle or whatever. But because it's new, it gets all this press, which makes rolling that innovation out a little bit more tough, because people are much more critical of it. And I was just thinking, as an innovator, you've got almost much more on the line. It's like everything has to work perfectly almost forever, because at some point there's gonna be a failure, and it's gonna be all over the news. And how do you deal with that? Other than trot out the statistics, which everybody just kind of glazes over when you bring them out.
Yeah, and then trot out the statistics and just include it in your planning. Say, listen, X amount of receptivity to this product is going to be diminished because of a factor like this, that it's new, it's different, they're not used to it. You think about airline travel.
Sure,
airline travel or intercontinental airline travel. I'm sure in the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, when people for the first time were getting on planes to go on 5-6 hour flights, it was pretty darn scary, probably.
Right. And then a plane crashes.
And you probably saw a big decrease in the amount of traffic when you had a crash like that. Nowadays, it's like, so there's so many hundreds of millions. How many miles a day are planes?
Right. And
so many miles. You can't even almost calculate the sigma on the 7 sigma or whatever it may be of the accident potential for you to die in a plane crash is like so minuscule.
Minuscule. Yeah.
It's just you don't even think about it anymore. Sure, it happens, but it's so common now. And I think that's the innovator's best friend, is the commonality of the thing. If they can get the innovation to be accepted by millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, then the inevitable accidents will be not acceptable, but they'll be understandable.
They'll be understandable, yeah.
I think is the solution for them. But they've got to get to that level of implementation to get there, I think.
Right. I'd still get into an autonomous vehicle.
Would you get into Hyperloop?
Sure.
You would? You would try?
I would not be the first person to go up in SpaceX, though.
No. Okay, all right.
Even though SpaceX, even though their launches have been fantastic and it's been super reliable, when the first time the first time they strap a guy to the end of a SpaceX rocket, everybody in SpaceX is going to be going,
please don't have an accident.
And of course, the guy up there is going to be thinking the same thing. Please don't let me be the first one.
I was going to say probably would be that's Branson's, or that I just get them confused.
No, that's Musk.
Is Musk.
Musk
will probably be the first guy.
He might
go off himself. I'll show you. All right, good stuff there, Dirk. Thanks. All right, well, regardless of how one feels about the topic of human-generated climate change, I think it's safe to say that most folks in the quality profession appreciate a commitment to reducing muda, which of course is the Japanese phrase for waste. In his article, ISO 14001, ISO 50001 benefit the environment and the bottom line. QD contributor Bill Levinson right there mostly sidesteps the political controversies around the topic of climate change and instead focuses on an argument for efficiency.
Sure.
I'll give you a little background here first. ISO 14001 is the standard guiding the performance of environmental management systems, while ISO 50001 deals with energy management systems, and these are ISO standards. They have a very kind of regimented format in terms of what you do and what you need to do, and they're pretty prescriptive in terms of how to do that. And like all of those standards, they really tell organizations what they have to do to adhere to those requirements if they wish to first obtain and then, of course, maintain registrations to those standards. And it's audited, of course, as we know. Auditors are going to come in and look at that and see whether or not you really are in compliance with what those standards say. And again, environmental management and energy management both can be looked at as key parts of a climate change mitigation strategy. I think many of us believe that man-made climate change is a real thing, and that it's important to address it in order to prevent long-term and perhaps irreversible damage to the planet's ability to support life well into the future. I've read things, you've probably read the same statistics, 97% was a number that I've heard thrown around of all published papers from peer-reviewed papers in climatology state that this is happening.
Right.
So that's pretty compelling for me, but
not everybody though.
Like I say, it's important to realize that not everybody believes what I just said. And Levinson supports the likelihood of climate change in his piece, albeit with some mites and mays thrown in there. He threw a few of those in there. Okay,
he waffles a little bit on it.
Sure, just to a little bit, just to acknowledge this degree of doubt, and to demonstrate that there is far from uniformity of opinion on this topic, especially amongst our readers, as you well know, Dirk. I want to read to you 2 reader comments from the piece that kind of called out the differences in what people believe on this. The first was headline, "No evidence." I'm not going to say who these people were, Dirk,
okay,
but I'm just going to say read their comments. The first one says "no evidence," and it goes like this: "There is no evidence whatsoever that man's CO2 has caused any of the warming since the Little Ice Age. Anyone who claims otherwise should present evidence. I have spoken to Dr. Trenberth, IPCC, and that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He's a well-known climatologist, and he claimed that evidence was sea levels. The evidence was sea levels. He ran away when I pointed out that sea levels have been rising at a decreasing rate for the past 20,000 years. When Jericho was being built, the Earth was warming at 16 times faster the rate than it is today. Global warming is just another scam." Just this person's opinion.
Right.
I'm not saying you agree with that.
Right.
That's one perspective from a reader who wrote in about this piece. The second was from another reader. Had the headline, "Why so equivocal on climate change?" And that one reads, is a little shorter. That one reads, "It is certainly occurring, and it's certainly attributable to man-made causes. You undercut your credibility by downplaying the risks." In other words, like I say, Levinson did waffle a little bit on that.
Yeah, he was addressing that.
He addressed it. I mean, he's actually, in past writings, he has waffled even more, and even somewhat denied it, I think. And what Bill would say that he's not a climate change adapter too much. But his point really isn't about the politics, and I'm kind of getting off on a straw man argument here, because really the argument is the efficacy of ISO 14001 and ISO 50001 as tools to mitigate waste. Really is what it's all about. I mean, if you think about it, why not reduce waste? Why not? I mean, these standards help you do that. I mean, they help you be more efficient in your processes, right? I mean, he always uses the money, and Henry Ford uses the example of dollars going up the smokestack. I mean, when you have waste that's emitting from your smokestacks in those days in a factory, that's stuff you didn't properly utilize. It was burned in some way and it was lost. So there was waste in that. There's dollars going up the smokestack. So why not correct that if you can? I mean, there's benefits to doing that, right? To reducing waste. And that's really the argument that he makes for supporting things like ISO 14001 and ISO 50001. Yes, it's good for the environment. It's also good for your bottom line. That's really what you need to consider regardless of where you're at in the debate. One other thing I wanted to put in here on this, do you know who Blaise Pascal is?
Sure.
You've heard of Blaise Pascal, okay. 17th century French philosopher and mathematician, and he was a really, really great genius of the late Renaissance. Do you know Pascal's wager? Have you heard that?
No.
Okay. Pascal's got a famous wager he made in the 17th century, and it goes like this. I'm not quoting directly, but I'm kind of shortening it for you.
Because you would have to do it in French.
Yes, I'd have to. That would be one thing. I'm not going to do that. Pascal's wager goes like this: a rational person should live as though God exists.
Okay.
All right. He's talking about whether or not you believe in God or not believe in God.
Okay.
So he says a rational person should live as though God exists and live a moral life, because if God does not exist, such a person is only going to have a minimal loss. I mean, you have a loss of hedonistic luxury, whatever, right? However, if God does exist, that person living in the right way stands to receive infinite reward in the form of heaven, right? And avoid infinite loss, which is an eternity in hell. So you think about that from the perspective of climate change. I thought about this from Pascal's wager. I mean, why not say that climate change is happening? Man-made climate change is happening. Take steps to address it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, you drive less, you bike more, you walk more. Good for you, right? I mean, you're not losing much. You're not risking much, but you are risking a heck of a lot if you're a denier. If you're a denier, you say it's not happening. I'm going to drive as much as I want. We're not going to worry about carbon emission. We're not going to worry about any of that stuff. We're not going to worry about waste in this instance. But you're risking a lot. We're all risking a lot from that attitude. So why not, using Pascal's wager as a framework, say it's happening, it's existing, it's happening. Let's take steps to mitigate it, because if it's not happening, the steps we're taking to mitigate it are good steps anyway. They're not really doing much harm. Maybe they're doing harm to the oil companies, but they're not doing a lot of harm to the rest of us. So why not mitigate it?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh,
Does that
yeah,
make it's a fair comment?
And by the way, I think this is a I think this is a problem with those who are trying to promote less CO2, less greenhouse gases, so on and so forth, and trying to lay it all at, we got to do this because of climate change. I said, just don't get off that horse. The easiest, biggest, get off that horse, promote it like we used to do way back in the 60s when we were trying to get rid of trash and clean air, and it was all about, it's like, you don't want to wreck your environment, you don't want to, you don't want to pee in the water you drink, I mean, it was kind of like very personal. It's kind of like, do you want to live like this? Do you want to drink tainted water? Do you want to drink, breathe fouled air? Do you want trash blowing around? Well, no, nobody wants that. Do you want to help your bottom line, not have waste going out the stack? I think it should be approached that way because you still get the same result. If your goal is drive down greenhouse gas emissions because it reduces climate change, what matter does it make how you get people to do it? Whether you get them on board with climate change or you get them on board with, I don't want to be breathing or drinking or eating this stuff, right?
I mean, the counter to that is from people who don't believe climate change is happening is it's destructive to our economy. It's destructive to an energy-based economy. We need to drill. We need the revenues from that. But getting away from that model and getting onto a model where energy is derived in other ways could be a really profitable model too. But entrenched interests who are making money, I'm not trying to be all socialist right now, but entrenched interests who are right now making a lot of money from an energy-based, a current energy-based, oil-based economy are going to fight that. People that don't want autonomous or electric or hybrid vehicles are going to say, well, we got to fight that. They're going to deny it. They're going to try to confuse the science to a certain extent. I think it's helpful to keep those things in mind. Why do people have a dog in this fight? What is that dog? What does that represent? And it's not that that's not a legitimate argument. But there's other arguments to me that are more compelling, that make more sense, and Pascal's wager is kind of one of them. So, that's my thought on that.
All right.
And you had a really interesting article because it's Christmas time, of course. And Taryn March wrote an article about her experiences.
Right. She did, and actually, this is actually may segue into something else that was in the news this week. I think, like Mike said, Taryn March actually wrote a beautiful story about, oddly enough, the Paradise Fire, the Camp Fire that pretty much everybody in the United States has heard of. 88 people died, 14,000 homes leveled, about half the businesses in Paradise also burned to the ground. It's pretty much a major catastrophe here in Northern California.
We should remind people it's 8 miles.
It's just 8 or 10 miles up the hill from Chico. Taryn no longer lives in Paradise. Her home survived, but she decided she did not want to live in a wasteland, so she is living somewhere else right now. But her column really isn't about the fire. Her column is about stories, about how we all have stories. Stories are who we are. What we do is very often a reflection of our story, our interests or our background, or sometimes good or bad, or story is just how we ended up where we are, how we ended up at our work, how we ended up living where we live, whatever. There's a story behind all of that. I think of some of the stories of people I've worked with. I've worked with physicists who were also musicians, a software engineer who acted in light opera, a brilliant electronics engineer, a really good friend of mine who was an aerobatic pilot, a co-worker who, get this, had his PhD in physics and was doing physics software programs, software engineer for physics purposes, who left his job in Silicon Valley to be a machinist because his story, his background just didn't fit his degree. I mean, he got it, but he really liked precision machining, and he left his good paying job in Silicon Valley to become a machinist. Each had a job and a story that reflected who they were. And sometimes you don't see those stories until you see a coworker or a friend or an acquaintance in a different context. Now, Taryn tells one story about a Paradise resident named John. He's a musician, a cellist with the local symphony. Paradise, a small company, a small town, but it actually had a very nice little local symphony. Taryn writes that, and this is her speaking here, like many in the town, John, and you see him there, managed to live frugally but creatively. You might say his social skills were overlooked in favor of his musical genius, but that genius made up for any imagined lack. And anyway, he is a mild, kind, and thoughtful man. His hair sticks out like Einstein's.
You can see it right there.
You can see it right there. When the fire arrived, John discovered his car didn't work, or he couldn't work his car. Didn't really matter which, he still had to act. So he strapped his cello to his back, made an unsuccessful grab for the cat, and climbed on his bicycle. He pedaled out of harm's way, and when he got tired, he coasted to the side of the road and stopped. He climbed off his bike, uncased his cello, and started playing with the lurid glow of the town behind him as backdrop. John did this because it's his job.
Yeah.
It's his job to make music. That is his story. So that's what Taryn wrote. That's beautiful. The whole piece, the whole article is really great. I suggest you read it. The link is down there below the player. So, but really, as beautiful as that story is, and as beautiful as the story about John is, it's no less beautiful than the stories each of us have. We may not have the glow of a city burning behind us as we play our cello, but our story is still unique and beautiful. Going back to this story later, a week or so, a couple weeks later, several weeks later, not far from where John played his cello alongside the road, there were linemen stringing up new power lines, city workers checking water mains, and an entire slew of infrastructure technicians doing what they do, telling their own story by doing their jobs. And you might be thinking, your story isn't that dramatic, maybe, but I am pretty certain that we can all tell work stories that reflect who we are. Many of us have taken work skills and applied them in non-work situations, or taken our non-work skills and applied them to our job. We do these things because that's who we are. Our story and who we are is made up of everything we've experienced up to this point right now. So why is this important? Why am I talking about it? It's important because I think especially today, we don't often see people for who they are, whether we're talking about immigrants or politicians or even our coworkers. It's just, a coworker is just somebody I work with, and I know this person only in the context of his or her job. And I think it's too easy to think of our coworkers as just coworkers, this person who just does something, as if that is it. But it isn't. They all have a story. Just like you have a story and I have a story, and that story right now culminates in being with you at your job and next to you doing your job. What's their story? How did they get there? How did you get where you're at? What does that say about how you both do your jobs or how you view your jobs? And I think this is important because I think if you understand the context and the story behind any person, whether it's a coworker or, like I said, a politician. General Mattis is in the story right now. We're hearing a lot of the background about Mattis because we need to put that in context with his recent resignation as Secretary of Defense. Because it makes sense. When you know a story, you understand why a person does something. That applies to a coworker as well. If I understand where you're coming from, if I know your background and so forth, then I understand maybe how you do what you do and why you do what you do and what your motivation is for what you do. And I think that's important as coworkers. I think it's also important as managers to employees and employees to managers, understanding where they're coming from. I think without that context, without the story, we don't understand each other well enough to be able to work well together. Absolutely. And I think that's critical.
It is. My wife is a social worker. She's a therapist.
Right.
And she has clients that she talks to all the time. And she has a plaque in her office that she refers to a lot. And she says, "Be kind, because everyone is fighting a hard battle." And it's really true.
It's true.
Everybody everybody you meet, you're wrapped up in what you're doing in that moment.
Right.
And everybody you meet is wrapped up in what they're doing in their moment. They have a struggle.
Yeah, everybody has a struggle.
Everybody's got a struggle.
Yeah.
Everybody's fighting a battle to do something. and it's hard. It's hard for them. They're probably not sharing with you how hard it really is. And it's not just because they don't want to burden you with it. They don't want to burden themselves by reminding themselves of it. But you can unburden them and unburden yourself by asking.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine, anytime he met, I mean, it was kind of cheesy in a way, but in retrospect, I'm going, it's actually kind of a good idea. Anytime he met somebody new, he would ask them, so, Frank, what's your story?
Yeah.
That's how and it was kind of like, what do you mean, what's your story? And then you would have, I mean, where are you from? What did you do? I mean, what interests you? I mean, he was really just to kind of get a background on this person, to get them to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't normally talk about. But for him, it was like, hey, if I know your story, then I know a lot more about you. I know how I can relate to you because I understand where you're coming from.
And I mean, I've increasingly become a political guy,
Right.
and in politics, this is an important thing that we've lost this ability to understand
Right.
people's stories because many of us are going to be gathered around tables with family and friends and loved ones next week, for Christmas, and for New Year's, and many people are going to avoid certain topics. Politics or something people are going to avoid talking about, and to me, that's sad. I mean, to me, it's like, well, you know what? You should talk about politics. You should understand where you're coming from. You should explain yourself to one another without rancor.
Right.
Don't get upset. Don't feel like you can't say things. Express your beliefs, but again, remember, people have their own beliefs. They're fighting a hard battle. Give them the grace to let them feel the way they feel without you feeling you have to impose what you believe on them, but share what you believe so you can have an exchange about it. That ultimately, people say, how are we going to heal these divides we have in the country? That's the way to do it, folks. I mean, that's the way you do it, is by listening with compassion and sharing your own story with compassion.
And I think that applies. I think that applies in the workplace as well.
Sure.
I think very often there's just a complete. Very often in the workplace, particularly where you have tension, I think a lot of that tension is just because we see this other person in a certain context. Oh, I'm sorry, we see this other person with a lack of context.
Yeah.
We just see, well, I don't like what he or she said or what they did, or my boss made me do this job. Why would they do that? My boss is a jerk, that kind of thing, without understanding, wait, where are they coming from? And actually, where are you coming? Why does doing this job bother you?
Right.
I mean,
why does the way that person is doing their job bother you? Because
Right.
I mean, when you get sensitive to it and you begin to look at what is going on, you say, somebody pushes my buttons.
Right.
Okay. You can actually diagnose that. You can self-diagnose that. Okay.
Right.
What is happening? How is the button being pushed? What led up to that? How do I feel about it? What's coming into my mind when I think about it? You can begin to self-diagnose that, and you can diffuse it. It takes some work. I mean, it doesn't just happen like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't certainly happen from listening to me talk about it. You got to really investigate it, but you can do that. And you can really heal those things. You can because you have to remember, you can never control somebody else.
Right.
You never ever can. At least not for good. You can
Yeah.
control people short term.
Yeah, if you're a boss, you can control them short term, but that's
Kind
about
of.
that's about all you're doing. Yeah.
But you can control yourself. You can control the way you respond to it, and you can diffuse things. You can actually change somebody's behavior by changing your own and getting out of the cycle.
Right.
These are complicated things. These aren't things that are easy. Like I say, they don't happen very quickly in human interdynamic relationships, but they can change. They can happen.
Yeah.
And Terrence Story did a great job of talking about that.
So your New Year's resolution: ask all your coworkers, hey, what's your story?
And
they'll look at you like you're pretty weird.
And your loved ones.
And
Maybe
your loved
you never
ones,
did that with your brother or your mom or your wife or your kid. Hey, what's your story?
Yeah.
It can help. It really can. Dirk, we have a couple minutes.
Okay.
I want to do one last off script for the year because I wanted to get your take on this. A couple of weeks ago, I thought that might be the last off script of the year, but instead we have this one. I asked you about what jumped out at you in 2018 within industry that you thought was really notable. You mentioned, and I went back and looked at it again, you mentioned 3D printing without finishing operations. You thought that was really cool.
Right.
You mentioned the growth in autonomous vehicles, which we just talked about again. We mentioned a little bit the continued increase in STEM education, which was critical. Mm-hmm. So I want you to take out your crystal ball. Sorry. No, don't take that out there. No, Dirk. No. Don't take my advice. And I want you to tell me what you think some of those trends may be extending into 2019, or things that maybe we didn't mention there. What are things you think may happen in 2019 in the realm of quality and business and manufacturing that you think we should maybe be on the lookout for?
Well, I have been saying one of the things they talk about on additive manufacturing or particularly 3D printing is that it is rather slow. Okay. Big parts take a long time. So some people say, well, so it'll never get into mass production. But I think it will. I think they'll do it the same way that Lego does it. I don't know if you've ever seen. There's a Discovery Channel had a show on Lego, right? Lego makes like something like 20 quadrillion Lego blocks an hour. So it's just something stupid. I mean, they're cranking out Lego bricks like crazy.
20 quadrillion an hour.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's amazing. We're put those around the world, we'd be 6 feet deep in Lego blocks. Which if you went over to Christopher Smith's house, you would be. But the way they do it is they got like these giant manufacturing plants that got like a couple hundred injection molding machines. And all of those injection molding machines are fed by, they're fed the plastic pellets by conveyor. And they've got like a couple people, or a handful, literally, running these huge factories that got a jillion injection molding machines, and because of that, they're able to crank out a billion Lego bricks a day, right? I can see the same thing going on with 3D printing. I don't see why you couldn't, and in fact, they could be programmed separate. You could have a bank of 3D printers that are making this part, but you've got like 100 3D printers, right? So you could have mass production, and furthermore, it'd be customized mass production because you could have a bunch of 3D printers mass producing this part, but this customer wants it in blue, or he wants his name and in raised letters on the part or something. Okay, so that machine spits out one of those, right? I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't do the same idea, just having a big old factory with nothing but a jillion 3D printers fed the material automatically and custom make precision 3D parts requiring no finishing, and you could mass produce and mass customize. And to me, that's where it comes interesting, is mass customization. I mean, no reason why not, right? I mean, you could, every vehicle could have your name emblazoned on the dashboard because that piece is 3D printed, and it's mass 3D printed, and it's custom mass 3D printed. I don't know. I think we're going to see that. I don't know if it's going to be maybe not next year, but there's no reason why it couldn't. I mean, the technology is there. It's just a matter of somebody saying, okay, I'll spend $1 billion on a factory with 200 3D printers in it.
Sure. I mean, it's just an accounting
it's just
thing at that point. It's like, well, it's $1 billion for the investment or whatever the number is, and we're going to unlock a $10 million market for ourselves. Why not? Especially when, unfortunately, you consider that there's probably no people working in that plant. Very, very few. It's
exactly.
Like, don't worry about any benefits.
And then we'll be talking about how many people are out of work. But doggone it, it's progress.
All right. Well, that's your last off script for the year.
What do you think?
I didn't really. I mean, I think that's one. I mean, certainly 3D printing, the continued evolution of 3D printing, robotics. I think certainly
more and more robotics.
More robotics in line. I think we're already seeing that. I mean, there's no IMTS. I mean, I always kind of do my crib notes at IMTS.
Oh, right.
There's no IMTS in 2019. So, but it's industrial Internet of Things. I mean, the Industry 4.0 stuff, Quality 4.0 we talked about, where a lot of the data that's gathered from the equipment,
more and more integration,
really integrates back and feeds back to your process. All that stuff is just really, I mean, unfortunately, I joke, but it does seem like a lot of this is driven towards getting rid of people in the process. And it's an issue. I mean,
people were highly overrated.
Yeah, you can't ignore that. I mean, longer term, it's not going to be a 2019 thing, but longer term, you're going to see more and more UBI. You're going to see more and more universal basic income. It's going to have to be, because people aren't going to have, enough work. I think. I mean, people have been saying that for centuries. So who knows? But I mean, it does seem like, certainly in manufacturing, it's going to continue to go that way. So we'll see what happens.
How I always did this on Saturday Night Live.
That's right. Dirk, you ignorant slut.
All right. Well, that is the last show of the year. Today is the last show of the year. QDL returns on Friday, January 4th, 2019.
Wow.
Right, I know. So you all have a fantastic holidays and New Year's. Kiss somebody you love. And we'll see you January 2nd?
January 4th. January
4th.
4th. January
Yes.
4th. That's it right there.
That's what it says right there. Just like I said, January 4th. That's what I meant, January 4th. Doggone it, I'll see you January 4th.
You guys have a great holiday. We'll see you next year.
So long.
Bye.